Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was just given the sign by John in the booth that we are on the air. So I think we're supposed to say you're in the air. You're in the air. So we are the real Superman here. It's not Cam Newton. Glad to have you with us this afternoon. We are coming to you live at 2 o'clock as always, from 2 o'clock to 3 each Monday. And we're glad to report that you can pick us up at your leisure. And that's whenever you're able to find some time in your busy schedules. And tune in what we do here at all of the programs here at allpointstv.com. We host a program here at 2 o'clock called, and this program here, of course, is one that's 7 years in the making. And I'm very happy to be at one of the, if not the top studio in the country. And we come here to talk about what's going on. And what's going on, a number of things going on right now in terms of the national posturing that's taking place. You probably are aware of the fact that we just buried one of the finest jurists that we have had in America's history. And when I think of jurists, I think about the one that served at the top of the Supreme Court in 1801, was there 34 years, from 1801 to 1835, and that was John Marshall. And there have been other jurors, not a whole lot of them are great, but there have been some that are great. And there are very few, any greater than the one we lost and we funeralized this past weekend. And I do think the president should have been there for the burial and the funeral of one of the associate justices of the Supreme Court. And I don't know how many times we've had a sitting Supreme Court judge this past and the president was not there. That is beside the point as far as I'm concerned. I think it resonates differently in terms of Obama, whether we've had other presidents that have excused themselves from the funeral of a sitting judge or not on the Supreme Court. It just plays differently with this president because I think that it plays into a different context, and that context being the disrespect this president has for the institutions of government. In fact, the president doesn't have any respect for the Constitution of this country. So when I look at what he did in terms of absenting himself, I just look at it through a different prism. And I don't think it has any innocent elements to it. And in fact, one of the pictures that captured the president and Michelle Obama at the wake, I guess you call it the wake, but really was at the memorial aspects of it, caught during a moment of silence, caught Michelle's eyes wandering around, eyes wide open, looking around. And some seem to have thought they detected a smile on her face, as if, so what? And if that were the case, I saw the video of that. And I would not be at all surprised, because we have a first family that we need to continue to count the days down when they'll be leaving the Oval Office, because they have really taken this to a new low. And really, I looked at the first family to be, because I think Donald Trump is the next president of the United States. I think the American people have made up their minds that they are not going to be listening to these pundits out here who are trying to tell them that they're stupid, because they just don't get it that this man has all of these flaws, and somehow we're not picking up on what they're picking up on, and so we got to be wrong because this man is xenophobic, he's sexist, and he's racist, and we must be zombies, and we don't know anything because they disagree with our verdict. But I think that if what we're looking at, and I think very strongly we're looking at, given what happened in South Carolina, that we're looking at the next president of the United States. And if that be the case, I think we have a class coming in. I look at that family that Donald Trump belongs to. I look at his wife, Melanie Trump, and you have to really love that she would, if she were the first lady, she'd be the second first lady we've had where the first lady was of foreign birth. The first one, I think, the first was John Quincy Adams. So that would be, and I just love the accent and the class that she has. And I think that Donald Trump is a very classy person. I look at his family and look at how he's raised his children and how they are part of the company that he built. And he keeps talking about the great company that he has built. I like to see some of these other politicians tell us what they've come up with and what they built. We know they build a lot of words and they do a lot of posturing, but what have they actually created in terms of being in the marketplace, for example, and doing some things that create jobs and things of that sort? And what are they doing? They're sitting behind a desk and making decisions through which, if they're wrong, then we are paying for the incorrect decisions that they made. It doesn't fall on their shoulders. But this would be a tremendous first family we would have. And coming after this first family we have right now, we need some class in the White House because we don't have it right now with this president and with this first family. And when they leave on and vacate the premises on the 20th of January of next year, I don't know what other person will be doing. I'll be doing a national celebration, and I'll be writing about it in my column and celebrating the fact that they're gone, because this has been a very abominable 8 years it would be at the time of his departure, 7 years at this point. And we have gone through the ringer with this president and this first family, who have cost us, they're flying on different planes going to the same destination. And the cost of that is not even a thought. I mean, what they're putting on the taxpayers' back is not, that's not even a thought about the burden that it places upon the taxpayers, because they take the money and they use it as they will, and have no respect for the American people, and they have shown none while they've been there. I don't know a single day that's passed by where the American people have not been insulted by this president. And I think a lot of it's deliberate, is in your face kind of a thing. So it's very hard. It's very hardening to see what is happening right now in the political process and the temperament of the American people. I think the American people have had enough of it. And I certainly join them in that. I'm certainly sick of the political discourse in this country and the leadership of those in Washington, D.C. So I certainly share the frustration of the American people. And I'm just really impressed with what is happening right now, as the elite are saying one thing and the American people are saying something totally different. You have to read my post today. I just finished my post coming to the studio, and I wrote about this elitism. And I wrote about, I know people think that I'm a Thomas Sowell minion, but I wrote a column. It's going to be a 2-piece column. The first part came out today. And I wrote a 2-piece column on Thomas Sowell and other elitists who think they have the right to think for those persons that make up the proletariat. You can call them the serfs, the masses, the peasantry class, whatever name you want to use for them. They think they have the right to think for those that are in the peasantry, that are those on the right, and they have the right to think for them because they are the elitists. In Sowell's book, The Vision of the Anointed, he showed me in his writings, particularly in the 2-piece series that he did on Donald Trump, that he wrote a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months ago now. But I was going back to read it again, and I wrote the first of a 2-part series on that, and I called Thomas Sowell what he's shown himself to be. He's an elitist. And it just dawned on me about what is going on with these elitists that reminded me of W.E.B. Du Bois's comment. W.B. Du Bois, who went the same way in which Thomas Sowell went. Sowell was earlier in his thinking was a Marxist. And this is the road in which W.B. Du Bois went down. W.B. Du Bois would have come in contact with Marx's view at Harvard University, being the first black graduate of Harvard University with a PhD degree in 1895. And then 17 years later, would be followed by the person who was the founder of Negro History Week. Now we call it Black History Month. Carter G. Woodson finished that school in 1912. So anyway, W.B. Du Bois came out of Harvard University in 1895, and by the time he had come out of there, he came out a Marxist pretty much. And he would have coined the term the talented tenth and applied it to the blacks in terms of the top 10%, those who were in the elitist group, the thinkers, of which Du Bois certainly put himself in that category. And he was talking with the talented tenth, leading the other 90% to the truth, the way, and the light, based upon the understandings you're supposed to have up here at this level of thinking. And I consider it to be a Marxian view by the standpoint of what Karl Marx was advocating. And what Karl Marx was saying is that the proletariat must, in fact, rise up and take over the means of production. But in order to do that, they must have help and leadership from the class they're trying to take power from, and they must be joined by some elements of that class, through which they would then have to commit class suicide in adopting the interests of the proletariat group, because they cannot lead themselves. And that's a Marxian view that I see in Thomas Sowell's thinking. In fact, I see that thinking in any of the elitists. Because one thing I had to come to understand, and I came to understand it really through a number of different conversations that have gone on in the past. One of them was between W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, and how that class conflict that went on between W.E.B. Du Bois and that group, some of the others that were William Monroe Trotter, who had gotten a master's degree from Harvard University, so he's part of that elitist group. And here's this lowly educated Booker T. Washington. What did he know outside of how to build Tuskegee Institute? And while they were building on bigger and bigger words, he's building an institution. That's what he knew. They didn't build anything, and what they did build, Trotter starting the newspaper in 1903 called the Boston Guardian, and had that newspaper, by the way, in the same place in Boston that William Lloyd Garrison had published his newspaper in 1831 called The Liberator. And so out of that history comes these elitists. And they are saying that, what did Booker T. Washington know? He's from Hampton Institute, and that school is not on the same level as Harvard. So here these men are fighting basically a class war inside of the African American, or at that time the Negro community. And they are trying to set Washington's voice down because Washington was not as well trained as they were. And they're going to have a storm going on between these two classes of parts of the population, one talking to the grassroots and one speaking from the standpoint of elitists. But I had to understand something here. I had to, first of all, understand more clearly what Booker T. Washington was saying in a large application of it in 1911, when he said that there's a class of Negro leadership, there's a class of Negro leaders who do not want blacks to lose their grievance because they do not want to lose their jobs. And I had to understand that in a much wider context in terms of the present day things that are going on, in terms of Donald Trump's campaign and those that are coming out in terms of denouncing it. And what I had to understand was that you can't have elitists unless you have those who the leaders are in fact leading. And you cannot have elitists unless the ones that are leading accept themselves as being adopted in terms of the concept of being led.
But you know, I'm going to insert here, sorry, but you know, I noticed something about the Democratic leadership. Okay, the Democrats are always considered the big party of the working class. Mm-hmm. The ones currently in the field never worked a day in their lives. Okay, so far away, and they'd probably find it disdainful to actually be in the presence of working class people. Mm-hmm. Yet they're saying that they can pontificate and articulate the needs and desires of these people who they have very little contact with.
That's right.
And another thing is, too, I mean, to paraphrase, I know David Bowie Reborn was great because he probably wouldn't agree with what I'm saying on this, but there's a song that goes, the children that you spit on, as they try to change the world, they're immune to your consultations, they're quite aware of what they're going through. Mm-hmm. I think the working class knows more about what they're going through than these people who are appointing themselves as a spokesman for these people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, they have, they're employed by being the spokespersons for the very group that you're talking about that they have no contact with. and they want to take the voice of those who understand the experience best because they live it every day and be the spokesperson for it when they have not been immersed in the experience because they're leaders living away from the vicissitudes of that existence on a daily basis. But they want to be the ones that articulate. You see that in terms of what we just had this past weekend. We had a march where these guys came in here. Jesse Jackson was in here, and he was saying, no pipes, no peace. And how many problems have they solved in Chicago? That's where Jesse Jackson's home is. And they over here, because the people over here in Flint, with this water problem, they can't represent themselves. So the leaders have to come out of the places where they are, come in here, and lead the people because they're unable to lead themselves. There are no leaders in Flint. And this is a Marxian, view that it takes those who are in the 10% or the upper class or the ruling class, if you want to call it that, or those who assume their status to be that. And they have to come in and tell the people how they are to govern themselves and how they are, in fact, to think and how they are to behave and go out there in the political arena and how they are to engage the political figures and make the appeal, but they're going to be the person to speak for it. They can't speak for themselves. And this is the kind of view that you run into. And I probably am shocking a lot of people by taking on Sowell, because I do have some admiration for the accomplishments of those who are on the level of thought that he is on, but he does not. He is not above criticism, and I think I've showed some problems with his outlook in terms of what he's doing in this particular situation with Donald Trump. Because I do think Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States, and I'll be shocked if the Republican Party that's coming out of the woodwork, quite frankly, trying to find some way to stop this steamroller, because this thing is out of control. This is a populist movement here. Trump spoke yesterday in Georgia. He's on his way now today to Nevada, because Nevada has a primary that is going to take place on Tuesday. And the momentum is all Trump right now. One person said, as a matter of fact, in his campaign, said that wherein many are saying this is a three-tiered race between Trump, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz, I don't think Cassidy is going to be a factor. He only had about, his numbers were not that much better than Jeb Bush, who dropped out this past weekend, because it was very clear if you bring your family in there, and your brother was the former president, he couldn't resonate his voice didn't resonate to the extent of having more votes for Jeb Bush's campaign, and Jeb Bush is still down there, wasn't able to break double digits. Then that right there was a telltale that no matter how much money you have in the kitty, you cannot get your horses out of the gates, because you've shot your best shot. You had the money, you had your family, the mother very much respected as a first lady under Bush 41. And that did not work, and his numbers were not much better than Kasich. I think Kasich needs to look at his campaign, but he's waiting until they get to the Midwest, and he thinks he'll do well in Michigan, and certainly as the governor of Ohio, we would expect him to do well in Ohio, but I don't even know about that, because some of the ones that's in these states are showing that they don't have that much pull. They don't have any coattails. Because look in South Carolina, where they had, and I really don't have a lot of respect for Nikki Haley in South Carolina. I haven't had respect for her ever since she caved in on the Confederate flag, which that is not a Confederate flag. That flag is a battle flag, the battle flag of Virginia. And I don't have respect for anybody that would cave in under the pressure when that flag had as much validity to stand over the capital of South Carolina, more so than any other state, because South Carolina is the one that started the secessionist movement. And if that flag belongs on any state capital, it belongs there as a symbol of resistance. Now, you can claim anything you want to about this being a war to free the slaves and all that you teach in these public schools. This war was not a war to free anybody, and nor did Lincoln free anybody. And I can give you the words of Sowell, who was the Secretary of State under Lincoln, and give you his words. If you don't believe what I'm saying, go read what he said about it in terms of this farcical Emancipation Proclamation, and just read what Sowell. I'll let you go do the research and find out what Sowell had to say. And then we can talk about it. But I will not have a conversation with persons that are here mouthing this nonsense that's been taught in these classrooms that's run by the government. Because they have a vested interest in the information they're allowed to get through the filters into the classroom, where those who are to be brainwashed and brought up through the brainwashing will come later. So, be that as it may, you can have that. I'm talking about something very different here. And I'm talking also about breaking away from the mindset that they've indoctrinated people into, and that's what's happening right now, and that's why this is so exciting. Nikki Haley, I don't have any respect for her. And it showed that although she may well be, and I'm not sure this is even true, it might not be as true now as it was before. I know there were a lot of people who had hurt feelings about what she did in terms of Confederate flag, the so-called Confederate flag. Because if you look at the Confederate flag, there were several of them, and none of them was this flag that they are now flying. That flag there, and those that wanted it out of the way understand what that flag was. That flag is the flag of resistance to federal encroachment beyond the boundaries set forward in Article 1, Section 8. They know that flag is a flag of resistance. And I was saying, since it's Black History Month, I spoke at one of the churches yesterday, and they had, this is my 20th year being there. I guess they have me there every year. And I think that's the first time they got a standing ovation. I expect I expect a standing ovation if you're not going to pay me.
Wait, remember back in the days of the Journal when they actually had a circulation? They had a daily comic strip was in the comics. It's called Wee Pals, and they had different kids from different backgrounds. I remember seeing a black kid in there who had a Confederate flag on his hat.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I always thought that was kind of weird, but but then facing now, I mean, that would just be incendiary now.
Oh yes.
Show that.
You better not say anything about there were blacks fighting on the side of the Confederacy. You better not say that to anybody, because that would really hurt their feelings that they were protecting their homeland also down there. They were shooting, they were in these trees shooting at them. In fact, they had black soldiers in the Confederate Army before they had black soldiers in the Union Army. And when you go and look at the real history of this secessionist war, the second war of secession we've had in this country. The first one was in 1776 when they separated from the British, and then using the same documents, really one document they used, the Declaration of Independence. How many persons read it in your history books? And when they were leaving the Union, they based their secessionist cause upon the Declaration of Independence, and used the same words that they had used when they stood up against King George III. And they used the words written by Thomas Jefferson and his Committee of Five. You talk about the Gang of Eight. Well, this is a Gang of Five. And they would have been treated as a gang if they had not won, because they understood with citing their names on that document. Those signatories on that document were signatories that were citing a death warrant if they had lost. But they did it anyway because they were committed to living either free or dying, because they refused to be slaves. And they had that, and I think the tax at that point was what was it, about 1 cent? They were fighting over 1 cent tax based upon the present currency.
I like to know, everybody tells me now, when I was in college, that basically all the founding fathers were a bunch of white guys who didn't want to pay taxes. And I said, okay, now I go back to but the Magna Carta, if you want to look at that, that wasn't the rights and privileges given to the everyday person. It was given to the nobles, the aristocrats, because King John was such a terrible king, and he's so abusive. So I mean, it's always got to basically you got to have the people who are the ruling class turn on each other and say, this ain't happening anymore. This is not going to work. And they always say that. I mean, it's like, okay, but what all the freedoms would they had if the ruling class, those who they think were ruling class, felt put up on? Just think how much more than the average person were totally voiceless, totally disenfranchised, if you want to use that term now. How much more are the average person? If the nobles, the people who are the upper echelon of society felt that way, how much more so than the everyday person would have been? So,
well, that's another part of that hidden history we're talking about too, in terms of why they came to these shores in the first place. We all talk about they came here for religious liberty, but they also came here, and we haven't been able to discern this for some reason. I wonder why. They came here also for liberty in terms of the sweat of their brow, that what they work for and what they earn belongs to them, and it doesn't belong to any others. That what they produce does not belong to a autocratic government seizing the fruits of their labor and enlisting it in the use of government institutions who use it as they will. They came to get away from that also. And we've been able to discern almost out of whole cloth, quite frankly, the separation of church and state. And isn't it interesting that they have not been able to discern in the same document, coming from the same interests, want to get away from the religious, persecution and the Church of England and all of that, want to have their own freedom to worship as they see fit, that they can discern that is in the First Amendment, but they cannot discern that there should be a separation of the state and the economy. And that is implicit in every part of the Constitution. Because when you have a economic system set up, Adam Smith certainly understood this in his writing in 1776, The Wealth of Nations. I read that. By the way, people don't think that you read these books. We read that stuff in high school.
What's an interesting thing that people bring up too is most people are considered Marxist. Never read any of the rural Marx books by Marx, like Das Kapital or any other ones. They never dealt with any of them.
Yeah,
and they yet they proclaim themselves as Marxists.
Yeah, that book, one guy that was a Marxist, they dropped the Das Kapital that was written in 1869. They dropped that book on the desk, and they asked him, since you're a Marxist, to comment upon the contents of the books, 2 volumes. And he said, that's a big book. And that was his comment. They never read it. But they are Marxists because they want to claim the fidelity to their understanding of what it represents as far as government and its role. By the way, anybody that's read Karl Marx, if you read Karl Marx, you would not be a Marxist. And if you looked at the application of what Karl Marx wrote, in terms of how they tried to apply it, you would not be a Marxist, because everywhere has been applied. What you see there over a period of time is that you see Mao's China from 1949 to 1976. You see Castro's Cuba from 1959 to 2016. You see Hugo Chavez's Venezuela from the time he got in office, and now been handed down to Nicolas Maduro, and you see what's happening down there. I mean, wherever you see it applied, you see the same outcomes repeatedly, where the economy comes to a crashing halt because you cannot incentivize people to work for the other person. And by the way, that's why I was writing. To some extent, about Sowell. I wasn't making just that point. I was making the point about his elitism as the main point. But I was talking about some of the things that Sowell has said in his criticism of Trump. And I was saying, first of all, when he said that Trump hasn't accomplished anything other than that which is in his own self-interest, I was writing about how astounding that comment is that Sowell would in fact make. But I think that's part of the Marxian view that Sowell had in his formative years. These transferred unconsciously into his more conservative years, where he's writing now from a conservative standpoint, but some of that Marxian flavor is still there, unconsciously operating in Sowell's unconscious.
I'd like to know this. If it's not in your self-interest, why are you engaging in it?
That's what I'm saying.
I don't understand that. I mean, you're supposed to be totally self-sacrificing. Okay, how long can that go? I mean, I can understand if you give your life for your family member, your child, your wife. I can understand that. But to just sacrifice yourself like this almost like this quasi-religious sense. I mean, I think that's very irrational.
It is irrational. That I'm glad you you brought that word up. It's totally irrational for a person to work in the interest of someone who has no meaning in his or her own life, is to make a people, as Ayn Rand pointed out, is to make a people in a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, is to make a people a sacrificial animal. What is astounding about Thomas Sowell's comment is that if you talk about self-interest not being a virtue, what you're talking about then is a person that is operating in the market in the interest of another, to the benefit of the other, and therefore not to the benefit of oneself. The reason why I found that comment so astounding, and it was actually astounding to the point where it almost make you fall off the floor out of your chair once you have read it. It's such an astounding comment coming from a person who's written about the market over the course of 50 years, as Sowell has done. It's astounding they make that, because it's only in the market where each of the participants are working in their self-interest can you have win-win.
It's the only actually moral sense, because basically you're not using coercion. Most of the time, you're not dealing in a marketplace. You're not dealing with coercion. You can't pass laws, and if you do that, then what they call crony capitalism, it depends on some governmental group or some governmental person to pass laws upon people so they can enjoy the corporatists can enjoy this kind of benefit. It's always the intervention of the government in the favor of business, which is the most atrocious part of business.
They always want to use the word crony capitalism. There's no such thing as crony capitalism. It's socialism. Whenever the government gets involved in the economy, that's a socialist economy. And this idea that an economy can be mixed with what? When you take a capitalist system and you put the government in it, that is not a mixture. That is a takeover. And the only time you can have win-win is when both players, both constituent groups, the producers or the business class, and those to whom they are producing, but in their own interest, the production is being made, then it's those two coming together to work in their separate interests on a volunteer basis where there's no coercion. Can there be win-win? In the other arrangement where there is a win-lose, then that comes out of coercion, because no person voluntarily works against her own self-interest. And when they talk about Donald Trump, when Sowell talked about Donald Trump having accomplished nothing other than that which is in his own self-interest, that is an astounding comment. And when Trump stands before the audience, wherever he goes, and brags about he built a great company, I'm glad to see that, because we ought to brag about when we achieve wealth and encourage others to pursue it, because it is wealth creation is possible for all if they can just simply find some lane in order to achieve it, because the accumulation of wealth does not keep anyone else from obtaining wealth. But what these socialists want people to believe, that when persons achieve wealth, then it keeps others from having wealth, and therefore we got to take wealth from them because they achieved it through what? Robbing somebody of the wealth. But the question that comes up, and they never raise it, but the question that certainly comes up in my mind is, how can you actually rob people of wealth that never had it? How do you get wealth and become wealthy by taking wealth from poor people?
And I'd like to know this, in this area especially. This area has got a very antagonistic attitude towards the producers, the creators of jobs. Mm-hmm. They want jobs. But as soon as somebody does that, then they turn on them, even if they haven't been abusive or overly demanding or punitive or put them at risk, they hate them. Just because of the simple fact that they have enough money to start a business. I mean, it's just the resentment level.
It is a resentment level, and you're talking about killing the golden goose. That's a good example of it, where you actually have someone that produces wealth or gives you a opportunity to improve your economic situation, and then they do what they say a dog doesn't do, and that's bite the hand that feeds them. And so the capitalist or the business person creates conditions for wealth for those that have nothing to do with their hands otherwise, and then they rise up against them, and they do not want them to be successful because they want them to suffer, and yet they're not suffering based upon the situation that's been created for them. They want suffering over here. It's almost like in America, you see the same thing happening in America. There are a lot of people on the left. I wouldn't say all, but all the ones I've come in contact with, I see it, that hate this country. I'll give you one of the locals here, Michael Moore, one of the locals. That film that Michael Moore put out, and I've seen some of the trailers on it, that film is not complimenting this country. He says his film's always been trying to make the country better. I haven't seen one film he's made yet that had that aim. This is constantly an attack upon the country by the left. And Michael Moore is one of those persons that does that. Just a constant attack. Everything that's put out there is an attack upon the country. Never any compliments on it. Yet, Michael Moore, and I knew him when he was in high school at Davidson, has made $50 million and some change in this country, which he could never have made it under the system that he advocates. And yet they keep attacking the golden goose laying the golden eggs not laid under any other system. And they just make these attacks, and it's a constant attack by the left that want to bring this system down. And you see it everywhere. You see it, for example, I was looking at these basketball players. They can play basketball forever out there on the sandlocks, and they never will get a check. They're getting $14 million for dribbling a ball up and down the court. Somebody made that possible, made basketball play off. It took an entrepreneur to bring that about, because if you play it out there on your own and you develop your skills, you're not doing it to stay out there. You're doing it to go in there where the market is located. People have made a market and created a market for that. They had to market it to the persons who come to the stadium to see it. They had to make it seem significant. Really, basketball is not all that significant. It's only I don't know how long the basketball court is. I could take a guess at what it looks like it is, but I wouldn't want to have. I know the football field is 100 yards and 300 feet, and they made that significant. That's 300 feet out of how much territory do we have in the United States? 3,715,000 square miles of land, and you got these football fields. And they are 300 feet, and that dimension becomes significant because people are coming to the stadium from all over the cities and so and so, and locating themselves inside of that kind of enclosure, inside of a stadium. And they sit there in cold weather watching them down there in that field and are paying big money to see it. Somebody had to market that and make that significant, because it's not really that significant. And then when they added cheerleaders onto it, somebody had to think about, okay, how do we make it even more exciting? And you put the cheerleaders out there. Somebody had to think about that. And then you market it to the merchants on television. You sell it as a product. They can sell you sell it to advertisers who want to advertise their products. You take an hour game and turn it into a 3-hour game. And it becomes a very commercialist enterprise, because somebody had to have the idea. Okay, they pay these basketball players and these football players millions and millions and millions of dollars, and these poor people come out of these poor neighborhoods, these poor homes, are making millions of dollars, and they're not satisfied with their salary because he's making more money than they're making. But they weren't making any money in the sandlot courts and on those grassy. And some of it got rocks in it. We use football fields, and they're making millions of dollars playing in nice stadiums. Look at how manicured the football fields are, and they're not satisfied with the $14, $15 million that they're making, because the owner of the company is making money, and he's a billionaire, and they're millionaires. They want him to be where they are. But they weren't on a basketball court of their own making. They weren't managing a team or creating a team that could be merchandised on TV. But they want their salary, but they don't want that person who owns the team to have his profits. And that is really a major problem when you get into business, because business must have profits in order to renew its capitalist enterprise. Because if you don't renew, you see, what the person in the capitalist system doesn't do, he doesn't ask the workers, the wage earners, to put some of their wages back into the company so they'll have jobs the following year. But somebody got to pay for that machinery. The lights got to be paid for. He doesn't take it out of their salary. He pays it out of the profits. And in the renewing of the capitalist machinery that goes into it, they got to be replaced because there's new ways of doing it, more efficient ways of doing it. All that capital replacement takes place at the level of the profit level. They don't take it out of the salary of the workers, but they get their salary and they expect it every 2 weeks to arrive on time, and it's there on time because the managers are managing the operation. They couldn't do it. And the skill levels are different. They're doing a job that's been created for them. The creator of the job that gave them something to do with their hands is obviously interested in a profit. That's why he did it, because it profits him to do it. They would have no profit, have no wages without that. But they want to look at where he stays and where they stay, and they want what he has. But they have nothing without him. And I can see more clearly now than I could when I first read Atlas Shrugged, the book that was put out by Ayn Rand in 1957. I see it very more clearly now in terms of why they were asking who is John Galt, because they knew him through his service. Didn't know him by so much his name, just who was he? Who is this guy? Because as one of the motives of society, he decided to vacate and go into exile and see what happens in his absence. And of course, we see what's happening in the absence. Look what's happening they were here in Flint trying to blame Snyder. But why did what happened in Flint happen in Flint? Because when I came here, and I came to the city in 1966, and there were people telling me that, I had students in junior high school telling me they can go across the street and make more money than I was making. I was making $5,500 in my first contract. And I never forget, I looked at my first check, it was $148 after taxes. That was less than $75 a week. And I looked at my check and said, that's what I went to school for. But they were making that and more in the what they call the shops at that time. And I had students would tell me in the junior high school classes, I was teaching 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and they would tell me they could quit school and go across the street where the factories were and make more money than I was making. I had a college degree at that point. And they were right about what they were saying. But somebody made that possible. Now you look today, years and years and years later, and those plants have vacated the premises. And what happened? John Galt left. And when John Galt left, as one of the motors of society, what happened was the jobs left also. And now what are the workers doing? They're not doing anything. Their hands are idle. And if those basketball players did not have those persons doing what they're doing behind the scenes and not being respected for it, and if they were not doing it, they'd be playing basketball somewhere else where there'd be nobody coming to see them because that has not been marketed that way. And they're getting ready to expand it into Europe, into other parts of the world, Asia. I think probably at some point, it might be in some parts of Africa. It wouldn't be in a lot of parts of Africa. They would not have the income in many of those states. But I do expect at some point you'll be in some parts of Africa, but certainly going into Europe, because they have a structure there already, but it's not like the NBA where you have these guys doing all the things they're doing on the basketball court right now. You don't have a Stephen Curry over there in Europe. And so the European players are coming over here because they can make more money over here than they can make in Europe. But that's the next place they're going to begin to expand the NBA. The NBA is going to be a World Series at some point of the NBA, and so will baseball, and so will be football at some point. They're going to market it because that's what they do. These are entrepreneurs. These are motors, and they're showing that they can do similar things wherever they are, because the skills they have, they can carry in other parts of the world. They're not just located here and can only use the skills. You look what they're doing as they've taken General Motors and Coca-Cola. Wherever you go, you see these corporations there. So it's not like they are just constrained to do it inside of a certain locale. They can take those skills and use them anywhere throughout the world, and they have done so. But we have this idea that these persons are in fact ripping people off, and Donald Trump is operating in some mode of selfishness that keeps others from getting what they deserve. And that's why I was saying earlier that I'm astounded by the comment made by Thomas Sowell, because Thomas Sowell should know more than anyone, has been writing on it for 50 years, that that's how the marketplace is designed to operate. In the capitalist system, you operate that way in your self-interest. In other words, the virtue of selfishness is not to have anyone who is a sacrificial animal unto oneself, nor do you require someone else to be a sacrifice unto yourself. You neither require sacrificial animals in the workplace, nor do you allow yourself to become a sacrificial animal. You're on your job to work for yourself and your self-interest. And the person set the machinery up is there to work, is to create that in his self-interest. It is in his self-interest for him to create that design. And so Donald Trump, when he brags about building a great company, and I think he says that in almost every speech, and I'm glad to see people are resonating with that, because Donald Trump should brag about that. Building a company from scratch and becoming a billionaire without the government coming in and seizing wealth and using it the way they use it. You know, in coercive societies, the only billionaires are the ones that have the guns. And in a free society, or one that is more free, because there's no society today that's actually free, and we see what is happening over here, where more and more of the economy is under the auspices of the government, so the economy here is not free. We have, and they're trying to act like this is crony capitalism. This is not crony capitalism. There's no such thing as crony capitalism. This is socialism. And socialism is, the kind of socialism here is, and it's very unique in a way, and very, very clever in a way, because the socialism here is let the producers control, at least visibly, their means of production, while we regulate it to the point we're telling them what to do, so that if anything goes haywire, they're the ones take the credit, take the blame for it, and not the ones down there that's orchestrating this from the level of the puppetry that they're orchestrating, because they actually are the ones that's actually controlling it, and that's what that 70,000 pages of regulations are about. You really don't need any regulations, quite frankly, because the people in the marketplace are regulated. If a man is making a product that is in fact a faulty product, the person that's buying the product will let that person know, and they let that person know by withdrawing their participation, and therefore withdrawing the profits that he makes, and that makes him have to do justice by the ones in the marketplace, because they are not there through coercion, they're there through voluntary participation. And that regulates the marketplace. You don't need politicians to do it. They regulate it because they want to cut out of the deal. And if they take their hands off of it, which they're not going to do, but if they took their hands off of the economy, you'd be surprised by how expansive this economy will actually grow. Donald Trump hopefully will bring that into the White House, and when he does, hopefully we will understand that he was at one time having to pay these politicians off to do business. And that's what he did. That's why Donald Trump had to put money on the side where the Democrats are. He financed some of the campaigns over there, and he had that financing on the other side as well, because you never know who's going to win. And when Donald Trump was financing and gave money to the Clintons and gave money elsewhere, people act like they cannot understand that. Sean Hannity was interviewing him last week. He'll be interviewing him tonight. I'll be watching that because I want to see what the new learnings are in that interview. But I can already tell you what's going to happen before that, the hour before that, with the Megyn Kelly program. They're going to jump all over Trump because they're still trying to stop this train. The leaders are still trying to slow this train down because they're not in the forefront of deciding for the people in their interests, being the person who benevolent dictators from behind the scene. They want to be the ones that tell the people who are not able to make up their minds, don't have the wherewithal to do it, the intellect is not there, and you're running amok of the leaders, and they want to be able to tell them what it is they ought to do. And so I know when she said, when they advertised that tonight they're going to have Glenn Beck on the program, and going to have some of his other on the program, I know what that's about because I know what Glenn Beck's position is. I know why he and Sarah Palin have fallen out on this, because Sarah Palin came out there and endorsed Donald Trump. Don't expect Sarah Palin to be on Megyn Kelly's program because it's not going to happen. And her program is just one attack, program after another to stop Donald Trump because she's part of that elitist group herself, part of that establishment class that's being challenged by this campaign. But this horse is out the barn right now. And Donald Trump's going to win tomorrow in Nevada. And if they don't get out there and stop this man before March 1st, where there are 600 delegates that are being divided up on March 1st with what they call Super Tuesday, as they take this campaign into the SEC, the Southeastern Conference group, those states, if they don't stop this train before March 1st, and it may well be the case right now, and many of them are saying that is the case, then this train cannot be stopped. And the people are taking matters into their own hands, and they do not like that. And that includes Thomas Sowell. See, one thing I have to understand, and I used Booker T. Washington to come to this understanding when he said in 1911 that people do not want the masses to lose their grievance, because they lose their grievance and they lose their jobs. I had to understand that in a larger context, and that is that you don't have elite if you don't have those the elite can in fact claim to be guiding. You can't have black leaders if there's no one willing to accept that they are black leaders. And really, there are no black leaders. It's just a belief in the concept that is true. There are no black leaders, and Robert C. Smith's book authenticates that. The book called We Have No Leaders by Robert C. Smith. And Robert C. Smith, by the way, didn't believe that himself until Harold Cruz wrote the book called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, went to Prairie View, where Robert C. Smith was teaching at that time, and he made that comment. And Robert C. Smith couldn't accept that, but being a scholar, he went out to investigate that, because Cruz could not be dismissed, because this man was one of those giants that was outside of the academy, by the way, because he wasn't trained inside the academy. It was just he wrote this mammoth book that nobody has been able to top, and they brought him into the university because who else had said these things is in that book. And that book that came out in 1967, I think it was, when that book was printed, and given what that book went into, some areas that nobody else had gone into, they brought Cruz at the University of Michigan and put him over the Black Studies program there. He didn't have a degree. And I have a letter in my files right now from Cruz. When I call him Dr. Cruz, he was upset about that, because Cruz was saying that his knowledge was that went way beyond the third degree level that the PhD is on, and wanted you to understand this knowledge was much more expansive than that. And calling him doctor was an insult to this man. He's deceased now, but I did have that exchange with him, and he was a titan in the academic world. Well, Cruz went to Prairie View and made the comment that there are no black leaders, and students stood up in the audience, according to Robert C. Smith, and they were saying, well, what about this person? What about that person? And we're pointing to these people like these civil rights leaders. And Cruz came and just kind of had this way about him that just simply, when he was tolerating, he wouldn't tolerate madness, as he called it. He waved them quiet and said, these persons are not leaders because they don't have any communitarian answers to the communitarian problems facing the black community. And so his idea was they're not leaders. They're just simply people that's put in front of folks, and it's assumed to be the case. And I would ask, given that understanding, they never say black leaders of what? Or black leaders of who? They're not leading me anywhere. And let's be honest about it. If you really want to make it existential, they're not leading anybody else either. If they are leading them, we'll lead them where? Leading who? Leading them when? And leading them where? And for what? Those are the W questions. The W questions with an H. And leading them how? I like to know that answer, at some time before, the week is out, because Black History Month ends on the 28th. So maybe they can tell us when that will be, when we can get those answers. Because there are no black leaders. This is a mirage. And you can read about that in Bonnie Adams' book called We Are Overcome. Not we shall overcome, we are overcome, meaning each one has a participatory role to play. There are no persons that can be leading this large group of people because the group is too diverse. And no other group claims to have quote unquote leaders at the top whose guidance they are being they're appealing to so as to be led to the promised land, which is being determined by those persons above them. No other group will even claim that. It's an insult to their intelligence. And nobody else, claims that. And so there are no leaders. It's an assumption that's happened over time, and people have gotten raised in the idea that's true, but there's absolutely no proof of it. And we can just simply discern for ourselves what it is that we are facing, and then particularize it to what we're going to do about it. In fact, the civil rights movement should first of all identify what the problem is, and then the problem becomes then what are you going to do about it, not where you're going to be led to. What are you going to do about it? And that's a decision that everybody has to make, because each one has to do and should be doing something. And it would not be the same thing that the other person is doing, because the other person is doing is something that is in his purview based upon what he must do to correct the problems where he is or where she is. Where the other person will see it totally different. But to say that one person can see it for everybody, really, when you think about it, is quite insulting. But the elite want to define the parameters of this struggle, because if they're not able to do that, then the elite don't have any role to play. And they are going to make this determination because, okay, if they don't do that, then there's nothing for them to do as the elitists. And that's what is happening right now in this campaign. Donald Trump is leading people out of this wasteland, this wilderness that's been controlled for too long, too awkwardly, to our disadvantage at the political level. It is now to take the country back from these politicians. And that's what's happening with this campaign. Stay tuned, because it's getting exciting now. And tomorrow we'll see Nevada, what happens there. Until next week, want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.